From the stars above us to the evolution of life, from an amoeba to the 21st century human, all of it begs the age-old question. Just how did we get here? Was it simply a giant stroke of cosmic luck, or perhaps the work of a conscious designer?
Hello, false dichotomy, because the truth is that the answer is neither. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here, and what we're looking at now is a YouTuber called End of Atheism. So right away we know we're dealing with a fairly open mind. And it's that age-old argument from design again. Now, some atheists would only argue this once and never come back to it again, but I wouldn't keep arguing it if they didn't keep using it. And some people may just accept it without ever hearing the opposing view, so we have to keep the counter-argument alive. And here we go.
The latest high-profile reply was from Professor Richard Dawkins in his internationally best-selling book, The God Delusion.
Yes, and there's something he'd like to remind you of.
You're watching BionicDance.
And now, back to the show.
In it, he claims to come close to proving that God almost certainly does not exist, and you can boil his argument down into 3 simple steps.
Steps which End of Atheism here is going to badly misrepresent.
Step 1. The universe is a tapestry of incredible order, complexity, and harmony. Just the Earth itself is filled with highly ordered, and therefore highly improbable life forms.
Now hold on just a moment. If the universe is as ordered as you say, would it not make sense that these life forms, improbable though they may be, are indeed products of this order? If they're unlikely by chance, then perhaps chance was only a minor factor, if it was a factor at all. However, do not misconstrue this as an admission of design. If the universe is indeed ordered, then anything which happens or exists could therefore have come about by the laws governing everything without the need for design.
Step 2. We could say that this is all the product of a designer, such as God, but then we must ask, who designed the designer? So, invoking God simply won't solve anything.
And that's true. Invoking a deity explains nothing. It is, in fact, a trump card used by those who lack the scientific expertise to even attempt research into the unknowns of the universe. Or, to put it another way, it's cheating.
Step 3. We probably don't need a designer anyway. Biologists have shown that natural selection created the highly complex life we know on Earth.
Like I said, some people didn't accept God done it as an explanation and went looking for evidence of what really happened. And they found it.
Now we just wait for physicists to discover some kind of natural law that tells us how the universe came to be so complex in the first place, and voila! Goodbye, God.
And it sounds as if you don't have the patience to wait for that possibility. God done it is a far more viscerally satisfying answer, and it's one you can have now. So why bother checking, right? And experience shows that those who accept the God done it explanation have a lot invested in it being so, which helps neither their case nor their credibility. However, by comparison, if they could prove their case being true using evidence instead of tortured logic based on faulty premises, most in the atheist community would, however reluctantly, accept it.
Dawkins's argument hinges around Step 2. In Step 2, he suggests that everything that is ordered requires a previous designer.
Where on earth are you getting that from? Page 139 of The God Delusion. After Darwin, we should all feel, deep in our bones, suspicious of the very idea of design. The illusion of design is a trap that has caught us before, and Darwin should have immunized us by raising our consciousness. Page 143. But Darwinian evolution, specifically natural selection, does something more. It shatters the illusion of design within the domain of biology and teaches us to be suspicious of any kind of design hypothesis in physics and cosmology as well. If Dawkins is making any argument about designers, he's pointing out the problem of infinite regression, that an explanation of a designer necessarily requires questions about that designer's own origins.
But this isn't true. After all, atheists themselves believe that the universe doesn't need a designer, but claim that God does.
First of all, you don't get to tell us what our argument is, especially since you're wrong. We tell you what our argument is, and not all atheists have the same argument. However, the most common argument is not that the universe doesn't need a designer, but that God does. The argument is because you claim the universe needs a designer, then the designer also needs an explanation. After all, if God doesn't need to be designed, then why does the universe? Why can't it be eternal the way that you claim God is?
To untangle this, we have to ask, when is a designer needed for anything? We require a designer when we find that something highly improbable has occurred, which we cannot simply put down to chance.
When we can't put it down to chance? In other words, when we don't know, and it's not viscerally satisfying that we don't know, and we're too lazy or stupid to go looking for the actual explanation. Just because something seems complicated and improbable does not mean that it was necessarily designed. This is, again, a false dichotomy, giving us only the choices that something is simple and random or complicated and designed. But there are other possibilities, and until we can verify what happened, making any claim beyond a hypothesis is not only unreasonable, it's begging the question.
This happens when something develops from a state of lesser organization to a state of greater organization.
Ah, but isn't the universe already an organized place? You're not seeing more organization, you're seeing something that's already organized become more complicated. Its level of order, its relationship to the laws of the universe, hasn't changed a bit.
This journey, from a lower state of order to a much higher state of order, is always very unlikely to have happened by itself.
See, I don't hear you saying unlikely. I hear you saying impossible. Did it come about? Yes, it did. Is it possible to have come about without deliberate intervention? Yes, it is. So what justifies arguing for a designer? Keep in mind, the universe is how many years old? Last I checked, it was 13.8 billion years. Even if we only take into account the age of the Earth, 4.54 billion years old, that's still plenty for just chance alone to allow even the extremely improbable time to happen. And that's not taking into account that chance, all by itself, is not the explanation. The universe has order, laws which govern it, and that's far more responsible than chance could ever be.
For instance, if you shook a box of Lego and the pieces tumbled out in the shape of the solar system, you'd be very surprised.
Yes, I would. But that's because I know the nature of Legos and how they're meant to fit together. Shaking them up and expecting any to be connected which weren't before is highly unlikely. However, even with my most rudimentary understanding of how the universe functions, I realize that most of the things religious people tend to claim are designed are actually far more probable to have come about on their own. No designer required.
It's just too unlikely for so many separate and disordered pieces of Lego to somehow rearrange themselves into the highly ordered shape of the solar system purely by chance.
But it's not by chance. When we shake them up, the laws of biology determine how our brain commands the muscles to do the shaking. The rules of gravity, of physics, determine how the pieces jumble about. It may seem random to us, but the truth is that chance is not even slightly a factor. In fact, while it may seem from our limited perspective and understanding that random things often occur, from a more rational and less visceral position, the evidence would show that nothing random ever happens. In fact, looking purely at the evidence, I find it very difficult to see the universe as anything other than predetermined from start to finish. What you call random, I call unforeseen. Now perhaps there is some weird quantum flux factor or something else I'm unaware of that actually does introduce random chance into the universe, but it seems to me that if we knew absolutely everything about how the universe functioned, we could accurately predict the future. Now don't get me wrong, I don't much care for the concept of determinism either, but that's where the evidence seems to point, and your claims of random chance are, frankly, baseless, no matter how much they might feel correct.
However, if there is something that exists that does not move from relative disorder to order, but has rather always existed in the same state, then why would it need a previous designer?
Well, it wouldn't. But now it's your job to prove that such a thing does, in fact, exist.
Such an entity would simply be.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Now that's one hell of a leap, from something which has always existed in the same state now to an entity which has done so. How do you know that this thing which has always been in the same state, always existed, isn't just some mindless energy force, or a slab of marble, or something else with no mind of its own? And if it has always been in the same state, how would it ever interact with something? By definition, to create change, one must change one's own state, however slightly. Simply commanding one's muscles to move changes one's state. Something which never changes can never interact with anything else, can never do anything. Now, it's obvious that you mean it was never, say, disassembled into its component parts, or never evolved from a previous life form, but they're all aspects of the same basic concept, just different in scale. So, again, your argument is baseless.
Now that we've understood that his second step is fundamentally not true, we realize that what Dawkins calls the ultimate 747 gambit is in reality the ultimate 747 fallacy. In step 1, he admits that the universe is highly ordered, and that humanity evolved from a much lower state of order to a much higher state of order. Chance, he agrees, is no explanation.
And, once again, you've completely misunderstood what Dawkins is saying. He wasn't the one proposing the ultimate 747 gambit. He was saying that you were, and that, yes, it is a fallacy. And I'll prove it. Page 138. The odds against assembling a fully functioning horse, beetle, or ostrich by randomly shuffling its parts are up there in 747 territory. This, in a nutshell, is the creationist's favorite argument, an argument that could be made only by somebody who doesn't understand the first thing about natural selection, somebody who thinks natural selection is a theory of chance, whereas, in the relevant sense of chance, it is the opposite. See? He's saying that it's your argument, not his, and that it doesn't work. But once again, you've turned it around to be the exact opposite.
But if we rule out chance, then design should be the only other alternative.
Well, it isn't. As I hope I've already shown, the universe functions in certain ways, has laws which do not require chance. But there are so many parts and forces interacting with each other, bouncing off of each other, that it gives off the appearance of randomness. But there is no design required. The universe runs on automatic. True, you may ask where those laws of the universe came from, but if you're going to claim design, you're going to have to produce more evidence than your current argument, which seems to be nothing more than, well, it's just gotta be.
And design needs a designer. But Dawkins can't accept this, because his second step wrongly asserts that any designer god must also be designed.
If you cannot explain the origin of the designer, you are just begging the question that he, she, it, or they has always existed without any evidence that would lead someone who doesn't already think so to agree with you.
Dawkins proposes that physical processes like natural selection can explain the high degree of organization found in the evolution of life and in the universe as a whole. But the delusion here is entirely of his own making. Let's take Dawkins's own example, natural selection. It describes the interaction between the system of genetic mutation and the system of environmental change. If there is no designer, then both these two systems themselves could only have arisen from chance.
Or caused by the laws of the universe and the interaction of matter and energy under those laws. Why would chance be the only explanation when we have a perfectly good one given to us by science?
And can only operate by chance.
Asserted with neither evidence nor justification. Fail. Try to learn to back up your arguments with evidence that people can check.
They have no will of their own, no consciousness, and no direction they want to head in. The outcome of two systems that arise and are governed by chance is chance multiplied by itself.
Except that it isn't chance. Gravity plus rock plus hill equals rock rolling down the hill. Rock plus bump in the hill plus composition of rock plus nature of hill bump plus rock's velocity and heading equals rock flying about in a fairly specific direction. None of this is intended, unless someone kicked the rock down the hill, and none of it is random, no matter how much it may seem so to the one watching the rock tumble. Just because something is far too complicated with far too many unforeseen details details for a human to predict does not mean that it was all up to chance. And evolution by natural selection is no different. If you could predict which creature would live to breed and with which other creature, and how this would affect future generations' survival, you could predict the path of evolution. But as with the rock hitting the bump in the hill, there are far more factors in natural selection and evolution than a human could reasonably take in as input and thus predict evolution's path. And so it seems random when it isn't.
This means that Dawkins is wrong to offer natural selection as an alternative to chance, because for an atheist, it can only be a product of chance. But hasn't Dawkins already agreed in step 1 that chance cannot account for the immense order we find around us? Isn't the whole idea to get rid of chance as an explanation?
Well, no, actually. The idea is to find the truth. It's not Dawkins' fault, or mine, that the truth seems to be pointing to an explanation other than yours, indeed, other than one you're willing to consider. And it's a bit telling that you seem to think that there's an agenda afoot. Says a wee bit about your own mindset, doesn't it?
Unfortunately for Dawkins, what applies for natural selection applies for anything else in step 3. Any physical processes that seem to turn disorder into order are themselves highly unlikely and demand an explanation. Natural laws cannot explain the order in the universe.
Natural laws are the order in the universe.
Because they are a part of the universe's order.
So the universe is ordered, and the laws are part of that order, so they cannot explain why the universe is orderly?
The only rational explanation for the immense organization in the universe is a conscious designer outside of the universe.
A conscious designer which, unlike anything else in the universe, is eternal and all-powerful, of course, unlike anything else we've ever encountered or for which we have evidence. That is apparently the most rational explanation. Makes perfect sense.
Unlike the universe, this creator did not begin to exist. And unlike the universe, this creator did not gradually become more ordered and more complex over time.
Once again, asserted without justification or evidence. Fail.
So the question of who designed this designer simply doesn't arise.
Well, obviously, that's not true.
Get rid of such an eternal, conscious designer, and you are left with only one alternative. That the universe, with all of its order, spontaneously came into existence. That life gave birth to itself, and then evolved itself over 4 billion years into conscious human beings purely by chance.
I've already shown that it wasn't by chance, and while we may not yet know the origin of the universe, people are working on it, and to declare that God wins simply by default is, I'm sorry, a steaming pantload. But nice try.
An irrational and unsatisfying position indeed.
And that's the real problem, isn't it? You can't wrap your head around this possibility, and you find it unsatisfying. Never mind reality. Your visceral reaction seems to matter far more than logic and reason applied to the evidence.
The only true solution is to find an ever-living and unchanging designer. Call this being whatever you want. Yahweh, Allah, Bhagwan, or simply God.
Or the Force.
This is the Creator, to whom both reason and revelation call.
I hope it's fairly obvious by now that this is not in fact the case. If you truly want to end atheism, you're going to have to produce evidence, not arguments full of incorrect facts, misquoted books, and tortured logic. Until then, you'll convince nobody who isn't already on your side. And even if you manage to convince everybody, don't necessarily expect loyalty to just any old deity. If he, she, it, or they turn out to be complete pricks, you're likely to see open revolt. And there are plenty of legends out there of gods who can be killed, even by mere mortals. Just saying. And I'm spent. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please, think. Ignorance killed the cat. Curiosity was framed.